This week, we're going to put on our walking shoes and stroll over to the Bata Shoe Museum. We're going to look at a few architects at home in Toronto, and we're going to go and check out the history of Leaside, a history so venerable it needs 2 parts. Hi there, and welcome to Structures, the show about Toronto's history and architecture. I'm your host, Angus Skeen, and I've got to confess, I collect shoes. I love collecting shoes. As you can tell, these shoes here I bought at a Goodwill in Memphis, and the woman there told me they were worn by ex-President Jimmy Carter. They've got a real lineage, and it makes me proud just to have them on my feet. It also makes me so excited that our first segment is the Bata Shoe Museum, a great little building, a great little museum in downtown Toronto.
What do Queen Victoria, Pierre Trudeau, Bret Hart, and Ginger Spice have in common? If you said funky footwear, you're right. If you didn't, I'd like to know what you did say. This is the Bata Shoe Museum. It's on the corner of Bloor and St. George. If you ever walked by the building and wondered about its odd dimensions, it's because it's built to resemble an open shoebox. The Bata Shoe Museum is North America's only shoe museum, and with a collection like this one, it's hard to keep a lid on it. The museum opened May 6, 1995. It was Sonia Bata's dream to develop a collection based solely on feet. This is one of the few museums in Canada that's built and maintained with no public funding, and that's no small feat, no pun intended. Sonia Wittstein was born in Switzerland where she studied architecture. She met Thomas Bata, who struggled with his shoe manufacturing business under the communist regime in Czechoslovakia. They were married in 1946. When the communist regime nationalized the company during World War II, the Batas were determined to rebuild the enterprise which had survived for 11 generations. The newlyweds moved to Canada, but still continued to travel to remote locations to fulfill their well-heeled destiny. Sonia began to collect shoes, but in 1979 she faced a problem experienced by so many of us. Not enough space to store her shoe collection. That was the beginning of the Bata Shoe Museum Foundation. In 1993, Sonia Bata bought the current site at St. George and Bloor. In this architecturally diverse neighborhood, the museum fits right in. Well, you know what they say, if the shoe fits. Well, anyway, the museum borders 2 unique Toronto neighborhoods, the Annex and U of T's St. George campus. The site of the museum remained vacant until the early 1900s. Around it, the Gothic Revival-style Bloor Street United Church was built, along with Georgian and Tudor-style English cottages. Crosstown, Star, and Diamond taxi companies all had businesses on this site in the 40s and 50s. The present site is an ideal location as it is close to the Royal Ontario Museum and the Gardner Museum of Ceramic Arts. It's also across from St. George subway station and the university. So it serves the general public as well as serious shoe researchers such as myself. Let's go in and take a look at the museum. Sonia Bata selected Canadian-born and educated Raymond Moriyama to design her vision. He also designed the Ontario Science Centre and the Metro Reference Library. The idea of the museum as a kind of container took shape early on. Mr. Moriyama was impressed by the array of shoe boxes that protected the shoes from light, moisture, and dust. Hence, he designed the building in the shape of a giant shoebox with its lid askew. The lid's copper-clad soffit aligned with the green parapet of the building's neighbor. As the copper oxidizes over time, the lid effect will become more pronounced and the visual link to its neighbor will become more apparent. Mr. Moriyama was studying and researching the building in this area. He discovered Toronto's not as perfectly square as we all thought it was. In fact, the corner of Yonge and Bloor is not perfectly square, rather it's on a 17-degree angle. And that was the angle he decided to build a building on. The walls are constructed on an 83-degree angle to the street. They are made of limestone from a medieval town in France. It was chosen because the tone and sheen resembles leather. Also, this stone appears to change color with the light, changing from a golden sort of leather look on sunny days to a mauve magenta when the sun is less permeating. To create the impression of a box literally bursting with its contents, a 2-story glass wedge splits the limestone wall in 2 and spills onto the sidewalk. Mr. Moriyama wanted to continue with this theme, so he laid the black and gray terrazzo tiles here in the lobby on the 17-degree angle. The effect was to draw the eye down to, you guessed it, the foot. Mr. Moriyama wanted to keep the feel of his whole building very light and airy. He commissioned Vancouver artist Lutz Hofchild to design this 42-foot window. The effect on the floor is supposed to be like a waterfall. The front desk is covered with leather and shaped like a man's shoe. I think they used Andre the Giant's shoe for this prototype. There are holes cut in angles on the stairs here, so that from the ground floor you can spy on people's shoes. These baluster covers were designed by artist Dora DePardry Hunt. She designed 6 different kinds of covers for these staircase balusters. She also designed the handles, which have become the logo for the museum. Although the architect has to deliver the exhibit rooms as basically a black box, Moriyama tried to keep with his theme of using the floor to bring attention back down to the foot. These mirrors were placed here so you can check out other museum goers' footwear. Wow, look at her shoes. Ma'am, where'd you get your shoes? Vince, get a shot of that. Ma'am? Wait, ma'am, wait! The design of the Shoe Museum is described as a hot combo linking aspects of Guggenheim's structural exhilaration with the razzle-dazzle of the entertainment world. This building is the latest avant-garde project in Toronto demonstrating deconstructionist style. The subject of feet has always been an ugly, ugly topic, but I think between the beauty of this building and the wide variety of shoes on exhibition here, from the first shoes that humans ever wore to the last shoes Ginger wore while she was still with the Spice Girls, this building truly is a monument to our feet.
You know, if you're anything like me, you put out a lot of phone calls to your so-called friends and you don't get any response. So you call and you call and you call and still you don't get a response. You start wondering, what do I have to do to get a response out of these people? Well, I know for me personally, something I respond to is quality local programming on television. Now, if you feel the same way and you want to let us know something about our show, the number to dial is simple. It's 1-800-939-RSVP. That's 1-800-939-RSVP. I don't know what RSVP works out to, but you must have a phone somewhere. At the best of times, I can't even get a date. At the worst of times, I can't even remember really what date it is. And that's why here on Structures, we perform a bit of a public service, and we remind us all what's happened on this day in Toronto.
It's 1944 in Toronto. You live at Yonge and Eglinton, and you're just dying to go to that sale at Eden's at Queen and Yonge. Well, you've got a couple of options. You can take a taxi, which is going to cost you a bundle, even for 1944. You can walk or bike, which will do a real nasty number on your knees. Or you can take the Yonge streetcar, which will chop a whole 24 minutes out of your day. But on March 30th, 1954, a whole new mode of transportation became available for the first time in Toronto. Do you know what it was? Well, let's take a look and see what else was happening that day. The blizzard from the day before in Toronto had carried with it, believe it or not, radioactive dust. But mysteriously, no one knew where it came from. Hockey fever had hit Toronto with full force. It was the 4th game of the Stanley Cup playoffs between the Detroit Red Wings and the Toronto Maple Leafs, held at Maple Leaf Gardens. Shakespeare's own Hamlet with Laurence Olivier was playing at the Highland Theatre. The RCA Victor 21-inch television was on sale for $279 with a super sensitive monitor, so that you could actually put your face right up to the screen. You just gotta love the 50s. The real news this day, of course, was the opening of Canada's first subway, the Yonge Line, which ran from Eglinton to Union Station. The idea dated back to 1910, when Toronto controller Horatio Hawken proposed a tube system running underground from Front Street between Bay and Yonge as far north as St. Clair, only to be rejected. The need for underground transit was really felt in the 1940s. During World War II, TTC trips each year had increased from 151 to 303 million because of low gas supply, wartime industries, and a fall in auto production. Now, when the war ended, the residential and commercial boom that followed tugged at the TTC's already strained streetcar capacity on Yonge Street. Meanwhile, automobile production had increased, causing major traffic chaos at rush hours. So, in a referendum on January 1st, 1946, Torontonians decided that they wanted a subway. On September 8, 1949, construction began for the 4.6-mile route comprising 12 stations. Now, a cut-and-cover method of construction was used, whereby workers dug a trench close to the surface and later covered it with pavement. Unmarked utilities were dug, believe it or not, by hand. The subway cars were modeled after the London Underground trains, and the first 104 cars, the only ones to have that shiny red color, were built in England. With the dawn of the subway came the end of the young streetcar that dated back to 1861 with the first horse-drawn car. The subway was officially opened at 10:45 a.m. at Davisville Station by Ontario Premier Leslie Frost, Mayor Alan Lamport, and TTC Chairman W.C. McBrien, drawing an end to 5 years of work at a cost of $67 million. 250,000 commuters rode the trains that first day. Lucky for them, tokens were only 10 cents. So, what was it like to be among the first to ride the subway that day? One man said it's something like a cross between a streetcar ride, a train car ride, and a laundry chute. You know, I've never thought about the subway that way, but he might be right. The opening of the young subway gave Toronto a brand new dynamic. It more than doubled the speed of streetcars, and it also modernized the city through its speed, slick appearance, and ability to transport thousands more passengers than ever before. And it happened here in Toronto on March 30th, 1954.
Yeah, you're right. You got a point. Yeah. I was just talking to my friend here about how when architects design homes for themselves or even for other people, they bring out some of their most, personal ideas. We're going to check out a few architects at home right now.
Architectural projects that I really like are the houses that architects design for themselves. Now, these are rarely grand, magnificent showpieces, but they do tend to show what architects like best about their own work. Today, we're going to look at architects at home. One of the best-known architects' houses is also the oldest. John Howard's Colburn Lodge today is a museum in High Park. John Howard was Toronto's first architect, arriving here in 1830, 4 years before York was incorporated as the City of Toronto. Howard's most famous building is the notorious 999 Queen Street West, which, at the time, was considered a progressive institution for the province's mentally ill. His own home, Colburn Lodge, is a classic Regency villa. The exterior is stucco, and it's built on a hill overlooking Lake Ontario. There are large French doors, and the porch is a half octagon. It's quite a delightful building, and very different from the provincial lunatic asylum. Fred Cumberland was the most renowned architect of Victorian Toronto. In a growing city, he built all the important public buildings of the day. His Gothic Revival University College still is a commanding presence. Equally recognizable is the neoclassical Osgoode Hall, designed in 1856. Cumberland's own house was called Pendarvis, and it stands almost within the shadow of University College. Today, it's the International Student Centre at the University of Toronto. While there is much beauty in the details of Cumberland's Pendarvis, the house is more restrained than much of the work he designed for other clients. E.J. Lennox was the first important Toronto-born architect. His best-known works are Old City Hall and Casa Loma, the magnificent castle on the hill built for Henry Pellet in 1909. E.J. Lennox's own house is right beside Casa Loma. Now, some unkind people have said it's been built with building materials pilfered from the Casa Loma building site. The name of the house, Lenville, comes from the Len of Lennox and the Will of Wilson, his wife's maiden name. Another architect building houses around the turn of the century was Eden Smith. He is best remembered for designing the early low-income apartment complex, Riverdale Court. Eden Smith's house on Indian Road was one of the first to be built in this area.
Characteristic of Eden Smith's design, the entrance is to the side of the house and doesn't face the street. Burton Myers is best known for using industrial building materials for non-industrial uses, such as houses. Burton Myers, an American who emigrated to Canada in 1968, built Sherburne Lanes, a non-profit housing development in the space between older existing buildings. In this way, the new building strives to conserve and build upon the existing streetscape rather than interfere with it. The same can't be said of his own house, however. Burton Myers' house is different from every other house on the street and practically every other house in the city, and that's why I like it. To some, this makes for very factory-like houses, but to others, emphasizing the functional nature of a house is appealing. These are only some of the homes that architects have built for themselves. What they all show is the remarkable ingenuity and creativity of some of Toronto's best architects.
Hello everybody in television land. Welcome to Toronto Trivia. This Toronto building contains 11 canvas panels painted by members of the Group of 7. Time's up.
No, wait. I gotta go. Hang on. Lee side on my shoulder makes me happy.
Angus, can you please use the script?
All right, where's the script? Leaside is a midtown Toronto neighborhood, roughly bounded by Eglinton Avenue to the north, Bayview Avenue to the west, and the Don Valley to the south and east. The land is pretty much flat, and down the middle of the neighborhood runs Laird Drive. To the east of Laird Drive is industrial Leaside, with lots of low, wide factories, and lately more and more big box retail stores. To the west of Laird Drive is residential Leaside, with modest houses, shops, schools, parks, and churches. This clear division of the neighborhood into two distinct districts is what makes Leaside particularly interesting, because the reasons for the division stretch right back to the earliest years of Toronto. Like most city neighborhoods, Leaside began life as farmland. In this case, the first farmers were the Lee family. I'm here live on location at St. John's Anglican Church at Yonge and York Mills. I'm in the cemetery, and this is the final resting place of John Lee, the first Lee to settle in Leaside. Now, John Lee arrived in 1829, and he built a log cabin just at the intersection of Laird Avenue and Lee Avenue today. Vince, can we go to that? Yeah, we're gonna go to a live remote of Lee and Laird. There it is. Yeah, you see that there? That's where Lee's cabin was. And Vince, can we go to the, can we get there it is, the street name. That's the family name, folks. Lee Avenue, L-E-A. John Lee died in 1851, and at that time his eldest son bought his own land in the area and built his own house. This eldest son was named William Lee, and he named the house he built for himself Leaside. Now, William Lee was a character, and his house, Leaside, was octagonal. It was built in the shape of a stop sign. Octagonal houses were a fad around the 1850s. Their 8-sided shape was thought to promote health, well-being, and to be completely in tune with nature. William Lee was also a bit of an artist and a poet. This is his own sketch of his 8-sided house, Leaside. It was drawn to accompany one of his several poems published in local newspapers. The entry gate to Leaside was off of a dirt county sideline that we now call Bayview Avenue. It was just south of McRae Drive, where these apartments are today. As farmland, Leaside was great. It was flat and it was fertile. In fact, the flatness of the land is what's attracted people here throughout time. It's what brought John Lee here to farm, and it's what brought the Canadian Pacific Railway here in the 1880s to set up shunting yards and a station. The station opened in 1884 and was called Leaside Junction after William Lee's house. It sat on the south side of the track just east of Millwood Drive. The shunting yard still operates, but the only thing that remains of the station is a sign marking Village Station Road and a clump of trees that look like they once marked the station's grounds. Old Octagon House William Lee died in 1893, but his descendants continued to farm the land. At the turn of the century, Leaside was still largely farms. There were some estate properties, and then of course there were the CP rail yards down at the tracks there. But all that would change in 1912 with the arrival of two real estate promoters and railway wheeler dealers. Their names are Sir Donald Mann and Sir William Mackenzie. Mann and Mackenzie thought big. In 1912, they were using a ridiculous amount of government money to build Canada's third transatlantic railway. It was called the Canadian Northern Railway, and it ran from Montreal to British Columbia. While primarily railroad builders, Mackenzie and Mann were developing many new towns and suburbs along their route, most notably the town of Mount Royal at Montreal and Port Mann just outside Vancouver in British Columbia. In Toronto, Mackenzie and Mann needed shunting yards and maintenance facilities, and the good flat land of the Lees and their neighbors just north of the rival Canadian Pacific Railway's Leaside Station caught their attention. It seems the two entrepreneurs hatched an idea that would get them their railway yards and a whole lot more. When Mackenzie and Mann saw the good flat land of Leaside, located beside the scenic Don Valley and just on the edge of the rapidly expanding city of Toronto, they saw a perfect opportunity to develop a substantial railway suburb. Now, this is a railway suburb, remember. Roads to Leaside at this time were really not that good. They thought people would commute by railway. To get their Canadian Northern trains to Leaside, Mackenzie and Mann built a spur off their main line. This spur was called the Leaside Line. It splits off the main line just south of York Mills, drives south to where it joins the Canadian Pacific tracks at Eglinton, crosses the big Canadian Pacific Viaduct over the western Don River, and re-emerges in the southeast corner of Leaside. It was here, in the southeast corner of Leaside, just north of the Canadian Pacific Railway's Leaside Station, where the Canadian Northern Railway set up shunting yards and eventually built locomotive shops and a roundhouse. So there's a lot of railway stuff in that bottom corner of Leaside. Today, the tracks are overgrown and the old shops appear to have been incorporated into more modern factories. But in 1912, the presence of these railway facilities had a profound effect on the design of the community. In laying out Port Mann in British Columbia and the town of Mount Royal in Montreal, Mackenzie and Mann had employed a Montreal landscape architect named Frederick G. Todd, a designer who seems to have favored formal boulevards and lots of well-treed streets. They called on Todd again to lay out their new railway suburb of Leaside. In Leaside, Todd was forced to keep his radiating boulevards away from the noisy, dirty railway yards in the southeast corner. As a result, most of the land east of Laird and south of Eglinton was allocated for industrial use, and Todd laid out his radiating, well-treed boulevards west of Laird and north of Eglinton. This is the exact same land division that can still be seen in Leaside today, with industrial on the east of Laird and residential on the west. Mackenzie and Mann were gamblers. In 1912, they gambled $2 million that well-to-do Torontonians would commute to Leaside by train. They gambled that Leaside's isolation would be overcome as the city grew up around it. They gambled that Toronto's real estate boom would continue forever and that builders would erect fine houses along Frederick Todd's radiating streets. In 1913, the pair probably used their considerable political influence to have Leaside hastily incorporated as a town, even though only 45 people lived here at the time. They pretty much did everything they could to market Leaside, and they probably stood a pretty good chance. But on June 28, 1914, Archduke Francis Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. Europe collapsed into the First World War, Canada followed Britain to the Western Front, Toronto's real estate boom ground to a halt, and the history of Leaside took a turn that neither Mackenzie or Mann probably ever anticipated.
Is there more?
No, that's it. No, that's all I know.
Is that how we're finishing it?
Yeah, no, we'll
This
do
is the
another.
end of part
Like,
one?
put up one of those,
We'll put up a
you know,
to
end of
continue
part one,
sign,
like,
right? Oh, okay.
things.
Right, we'll do
Like
a part two.
Yeah, we'll do a part 2 with more history.
Cram it in.
Well, that's a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that'll be good. Well, I hope you enjoyed touring around the Bata Shoe Museum and looking at the homes of some Toronto architects, and I hope you also enjoyed my little tour through Leaside as well. We'll have more on Toronto's history and architecture on the next episode of Structures. If you've enjoyed this episode of Structures, why don't you join me, Angus Skeen, for a live walking tour of a real Toronto neighborhood? If you'd like more information on the walking tours, dial 416-885-WALK. That's 416-885-9255. Operators are standing by.